Lebanon, a long-troubled nation that now finds itself at a perilous crossroads. As the sun sets over southern Beirut, a haunting silence hangs in the air, broken only by the echoes of conflict and the shrill cries of humanitarian crisis. Since the onset of Israel's ground operations, the humanitarian crisis in Lebanon has spiraled into a tragedy marked by suffering and despair. Relentless airstrikes have claimed many lives, leaving families shattered and communities in ruins. Makeshift shelters fill the streets with desperate individuals crowding into schools and worship areas and places, seeking refuge from the violence. Parents cradle their children, struggling against the gnawing absence of food and clean water. As violations of international law continue unabated by Israel, this episode delves into the harrowing realities faced by those caught in the crossfire, exploring how these events exacerbate an already dire situation in Lebanon. I'm Hani Saif, and this is Think Tank.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Beneath a sky painted with the hues of war, Lebanon weeps. The streets are lined with innocent children, shattered homes, and the haunting cries of the displaced. A symphony of sorrow now plays in a nation grappling with a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented proportions.
A humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Lebanon as Israel continues its escalation. According to UNICEF, more than 300,000 children have been displaced in the past week alone, fleeing intense airstrikes. UNICEF's executive director, Catherine Russell, has expressed deep concern, stating that at least 80 children have been killed and hundreds more injured in the past week. The violence has displaced over 1 million people, who now live in dire conditions in makeshift shelters or on the streets. Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati and UN humanitarian coordinator in Lebanon Imran Reza have urgently appealed for $426 million in aid to meet the needs of displaced people. Israel has now launched a ground invasion, which has exacerbated the crisis and caused thousands to flee to neighboring countries like Syria and Iraq. The influx of refugees now threatens to strain resources in these countries.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our show to the UN Security Council emergency session taking place now in New York. And this is what the official United States spokesman has to say.
And we have a collective responsibility as members of the Security Council to impose additional sanctions on the IRGC for supporting terrorism and for flaunting so many of this Council's resolutions. If this Council sits on its hands, what message will that send? I fear that silence and inaction will only invite the IRGC to repeat attacks like what we saw yesterday and on April 13th of this year, again and again and again. Colleagues, we meet at a moment when there is a heightened risk of countries in the region being dragged into a broader conflict. This includes Lebanon. The intensified fighting over the last week has displaced nearly 1 million people, and we mourn the many civilians who've been killed. We also recognize that for nearly a year, Israel has repeatedly called for the full implementation of Resolution 1701, even as Hezbollah's attacks along the Israeli-Lebanese border have displaced Lebanese people. And even as Hezbollah has blocked Lebanon's government from exercising full sovereignty on its side of the blue line, it is significant that even in the aftermath of recent events, Israel is still calling for the full implementation of Resolution 1701. Achieving this outcome through the hard work of diplomacy remains the United States' urgent priority. We strongly believe that a diplomatic solution along the blue line, consistent with Resolution 1701, offers the only path to durably de-escalate tensions and allow Israeli and Lebanese citizens to return to their homes with safety and security. As we pursue this diplomatic solution, we reiterate our call on all parties to protect civilians. We also underscore our support for UNIFIL and emphasize that all parties must ensure UNIFIL personnel remain secure. Colleagues, we are also committed to doing everything possible to end the war in Gaza, where Palestinian civilians have been caught in the crosshairs of war, where dire humanitarian crisis persists. That's why we're working to bring about a ceasefire deal with release of hostages, consistent with Resolution 2735. The events of the past week should send an unambiguous message to Hamas's leadership, which continues to cower in tunnels beneath Gaza. Hezbollah and Iran will not rescue you. The only path forward is a ceasefire agreement. We must double down on diplomatic solutions that would ensure the safety of people across the region. As we do, there should be no doubt. The United States will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and any other Iranian-supported terrorists. Of course, how Israel defends itself matters. We continue to make clear that measures must be taken to minimize civilian harm. Colleagues, as President Biden emphasized following yesterday's attack, the United States is fully supportive of Israel. Our actions have been defensive in nature. Let me be clear, the Iranian regime will be held responsible for its actions, and we strongly warn against Iran or its proxies taking actions against the United States or for their actions against Israel. Colleagues, this moment of great risk is a test of this Council. It is imperative that we unequivocally condemn Iran's attack and demand that it cease its support for terrorism in the region. People in Israel, in Gaza, and the West Bank, in Lebanon, and across the region deserve a durable peace, and it is far past time for this Council to hold Iran accountable for fanning the flames of war. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie la représentante.
I thank the representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Slovenia for their able leadership as President of the Council during the month of September. Let me also take this opportunity to congratulate you, Madam President, for assuming the presidency for October. I express my deep gratitude to the Secretary General for his briefing today and his tireless efforts for peace in the Middle East. This is a moment of reckoning for the Security Council. Resolution 1701 has been violated by all parties on the ground. A broader regional war with the potential to devastate not just Lebanon and the region, but far beyond, is dangerously knocking on our door. Our repeated calls for urgent restraint have been ignored. Both the regional stability and the credibility of this Council are now in jeopardy. Let there be no misunderstanding. It was Hamas' brutal attacks in broad daylight that set this escalation in motion. However, neither October 7th nor the ensuing response give any actor the right to violate the international norms and institutions that the United Nations and the global community have built. over decades, including international humanitarian law, Security Council resolutions, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity stipulated under the UN Charter. The Security Council, which bears the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, must unite and act. This is not like any other situation. This conflict has the potential to broaden and deepen, involving many countries without clear limitations in geography, and with far-reaching implications on international politics, economics, and even humanity as a whole. This demands more than passive condemnation. The Security Council must do something significant now to prevent the situation from plunging deeper into the abyss. The very raison d'etre of the Security Council is at stake here. Indeed, now is the time for the Security Council to draw a firm line in the sand. No actor should be given a green light of impunity or a blank check to operate far beyond the rule of law. We cannot afford to be paralyzed by frustration or helplessness. Colleagues, let me conclude by fully echoing the statement made by the Secretary General yesterday. And I quote, "I condemn the broadening of the Middle East conflict with escalation after escalation. This must stop. We absolutely need a ceasefire," unquote. I thank you.
Je remercie le
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea, and I now invite the representative of Slovenia to take the floor.
On behalf of Ambassador Boger and our entire team, to thank you sincerely and other members for your kind words, and also to wish to congratulate you and your team for assuming the presidency of the Council for October. Wish you all the best. We thank the Secretary General for his briefing. Madam President, in the last 2 weeks, we have met several times to discuss the situation in the Middle East. It has become increasingly clear that the current escalation is gaining its own, even more dangerous momentum. The actions and reactions of actors involved are dragging the region further away from peace and closer to an all-out war. No single party can absolve itself of blame for the chaos that is unfolding. This has become a crisis of retaliation and vengeance, where each strike fuels the next. Let me be clear, the region needs full and immediate de-escalation. For this to happen, a ceasefire on all fronts is urgent. We condemn the recent escalation in the Middle East. This includes Iranian attack on Israel. It includes Israeli attacks on Lebanon and the escalation between Hezbollah and Israel. We call on Israel to revoke the ground operation in southern Lebanon. It also includes continuous Israeli military operation in Gaza, and it includes yesterday's terror attack in Jaffa. We see deeply troublesome parallels. Escalation from any side only leads to further violence, not security or peace. We want to underline more violence cannot bring more stability and security in the region or beyond. War is not a solution to the problems in the Middle East. There is no military solution to the crisis. We call on all countries and actors to show restraint, and to everyone with influence must exert it. To Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis and others, the circle of violence must stop. Retaliations must stop. Escalations must stop. We call on all parties to respect international law, particularly international humanitarian human rights law. Respect for and compliance with international law are a must. Protection of civilians must be ensured at all times, and we are dismayed by the impact of the escalation in Lebanon on civilians and condemn the high number of civilian casualties. Massive displacement in Lebanon will add an additional strain on a country which is already facing numerous challenges. Equally, this intensification of the conflict will not bring thousands of displaced Israelis back to their homes. And we must not forget about the entire population of Gaza being displaced repeatedly. There is a dire need to recommit and fully implement Resolution 1701. This Council must stand united in its call for de-escalation and ceasefire. We repeat our call for safety and security of UNIFIL to be ensured at all times. We also take this opportunity to express our full support to the work of the United Nations and the Secretary General in this crisis. We appeal to Israel to reconsider today's announcement. It is high time to strengthen the role of diplomacy and to prioritize peace. We support all initiatives which could bring stability about peace. Ceasefire negotiations related to Lebanon and to Gaza are utmost needed. We underline this Council has primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. The region is standing at a precipice. We are a step away from an all-out war that threatens not only the region, but global peace and stability. In the complex history of the Middle East, the Council has made various attempts to shoulder its responsibility. It is now on us, these 15 countries sitting by this table, to unite and call out for an all-out ceasefire. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie la représentante.
I thank the representative of Slovenia. I now invite the representative of Algeria to take the floor.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. That was the UN Security Council meeting taking place in New York discussing the escalating situation in Lebanon and followed rather by the speech of the French official spokesperson and the United Kingdom spokesperson as well. And to shed more light on this current meeting, we are joined by Mr. Majid Boudin, the Professor of International Law from Paris. Mr. Boudin, thank you very much for joining us. First off, how do you read the initial response? What is your initial response to what we have been witnessing and listening to by the official UN Security Council meeting spokesmen?
All the matters are residing in one point, which is how to make full and correct application of international law in these issues. Here we have they have at the Security Council they have raised the matter of the resolution 1701, and everybody now has agreed that this resolution was not made applicable, was not enforced. And today we are watching the effects of non-enforcing a resolution or non-enforcing a decision of or an advisory decision of the International Court of Justice. The result is when we don't enforce, when the world community does not enforce a resolution, we have a disaster a few years later. And then the lesson that we have to draw from this and the conclusion that we have to draw is to make a full application of any resolution. Otherwise, it does mean that all what we are talking about at the United Nations or the Security Council of the General Assembly is just words, and people, they don't trust words anymore. They want acts. So what the Korean delegation has said today, that that we have to treat, in fact, we have to treat equally everybody, and everybody is responsible in this disaster that we are living now. First of all, in October 7th, the Hamas attack was effectively a terrorist attack. But the reaction of Israel against the Hamas decision or the Hamas attack is also contrary to international law, to humanitarian international law, because it was disproportionate and it has targeted not the Hamas people, but it has targeted the civilians, elder people, women, children, the infrastructure of the country, and now Gaza is almost destroyed, and Israel is bearing a responsibility, like Hamas is bearing responsibility. So what was said today at the Security Council is that it was not a reason to destroy a whole population. More than 40,000 people are killed, are destroyed. The country is destroyed. It doesn't mean that the Israeli civilians were casualties or were collateral damages or were. We have to respect this and we have to condemn Hamas for what it has made. But on the other side, nobody can avoid to condemn Israel for its reaction. Then we go back to Hezbollah and what he did to so-called support to Hamas, and he made these attacks on civilians in the northern part of Israel. And the reaction of Israel was also against international law. The Hezbollah was against international law because it was attacking another state, and it's prevented by international law. And the reaction of Israel was also disproportionate and has targeted civilians. And now when we see all the civilians on the roads in Lebanon and from south to north of Lebanon, I mean, these people, they are in their homeland and they are moving from a place to another, looking for a shelter. And this is not acceptable. And we have a lot of people wounded.
Sir, in the speech of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he described the situation taking place in Gaza and in Lebanon as sickening. And he also called for a ceasefire in both countries. The spokesman of France supported that. The UK spokesman also supported that. However, she also mentioned that Israel has the right to defend itself. And as we've heard by the American spokesman in the UN Security Council, she said that she fully supports the Israeli stance. Now, what should we believe? What should we bet on? Is it understanding and respecting Resolution 1701, respecting the Blue Nile, or should we expect a full backing by the US and also a backing by the UK to the Israeli stance?
Backing Israel for its right to defend itself and for its right of existence, it could be accepted, but only in the limits of not provoking casualties against civilians in these unacceptable proportions. Because these civilians, they are not responsible of anything. They are just the victims of an Israeli attack. And Israel cannot justify this disproportionate attack. And disproportion is a notion of international law. It's a crucial principle in international law. So it fixes the limits of any act. A state can retaliate, but must retaliate in certain limits. And now these limits, as the Secretary General of the UN has mentioned several times, we went beyond all these limits. So the US can support their ally, or the UK can do it, but they cannot do it at any price, and they must do it at certain limits. France, for instance, last week made a proposal, which was very wise proposal, to limit the veto, to veto any resolution. These limits must be made. This is the notion of proportion. So when there is a mass massacre like we have seen in Gaza, the vote will not be allowed. And this is the progress in the to reshuffle the United Nations system, because people cannot accept that. 40,000 people is not an acceptable matter. It's not easy to accept it, and we cannot justify it. The conscience of the world does not accept that. Now we are escalating, and now Iran is using Hezbollah and is using the Houthis in this escalation, and this could leave the area in more suffering, in an uncontrolled war. From Bab el-Mandab, the Red Sea, to the Mediterranean, we cannot accept, and the international community cannot accept that it will go without any control. People must now, we must retain from this that we have to put pressure on the parties to stop this war, to come to a ceasefire, and to come to really a solution. Because now this escalation will lead to more damages and to more harm, and the first victims and the real victims are the civilians, and it's not allowed by international law. And if we continue like that, we will lose.
I would like, yes, well, I want to extend my thanks of international law. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as Lebanon endures this escalating humanitarian catastrophe, the call for justice and accountability grows louder, as we've just witnessed at the UN Security Council. Now the world must confront the urgent need for humanitarian support and adhere to international law, ensuring that the voices of the affected are not silenced. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. Tune in next time as we dissect the latest political, economic and social developments from around the world. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.